to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And welcome to another week of episodes here on LOA Today. I am joined today by Hohman, who has a really interesting topic from my perspective, because listeners know that despite the fact that what we talk about here is often has a spiritual side to it and is a little bit woo-woo, we're very science-oriented. We love science. And she actually is interested in and devoted to the science of friendship. And I thought to myself, I like that. I don't know anyone else who does the science of, I mean, you're kind of like alone in your field, Jewel. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I'm very aware, yeah.
It's a large field of one, right?
Exactly.
But how did that come about? I mean, you've been doing this for a while, but I'm asking a kind of a leading question because I know that there's always a backstory behind it that makes it really interesting. So I figured I'd bring out the backstory that way. But how did you end up becoming interested in the science of friendship?
Yes, well, ultimately really struggling with it myself, right? I'm a little under the weather, so I might be quieter than I normally am today. I'll get closer to the mic, but
we hear you just fine, so it's not an issue. Don't worry about it.
Beautiful. But truly through struggling with it myself, I always had friends growing up, but I didn't feel really meaningfully connected to the friends that I did have. And not part of it was I needed to know how to create more aligned friendships. However, part of it was I did have aligned friendships with wonderful people and just really had, I didn't know it at the time, but it was social anxiety and overthinking and questioning myself around my friends. So I really struggled with that my whole life. And people would always say to me, that gets better as you get older. That gets better as you get older. Then I graduated college and it was not getting better and I was getting older. So I was really starting to get concerned. And then even before the pandemic, I was in my mid-20s and I started to realize that my friends were moving. They were in different life stages. Some were getting married, having kids. Some were doing all these other things in their careers. And I didn't know this at the time either, but I was experiencing what is called the friendship gap that happens in your mid to late 20s because your friends start to transition and do other things with their lives and you're so used to spending so much time with them. So I was experiencing that. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it was off. So I was experiencing that and I was like, I just don't want to experience this for the rest of my life. Like, I want to feel meaningfully close and connected and have these aligned friendships. There's got to be something out there that I can figure out. Now, I have a degree in psychology and sociology.
Helpful.
Yes, very helpful. I worked in a psych lab. I know how to read research. So just for me, myself, and I was like, I'm going to learn everything I can about this. I'm going to figure this out. Connection is so important. It was such a fundamental need for all of us, but especially for me. I'm not somebody that has a really close relationship with their family, and I really wanted to create that family for myself. So I dove into the research, learned everything I could about it, and a little bit before the pandemic, and then even while the pandemic was happening, I created aligned friendships that were the friendships I used to daydream about having.
Wow.
I became so much more socially confident to the point where people would be like, oh my gosh, Jewel, like there's something different about you. You have like a different energy to you.
Nice.
And I had people asking me if they could join my girls' trips or how did I do this? How did I make this happen? And I had known, right, with doing the research that I was not the only one. I knew that we had a loneliness epidemic, that we live truly in a culture of isolation. But when people started saying those things to me, I was like, oh my gosh, these are real people that are really struggling with this. So I am a huge friendship advocate. I really love to help people with high functioning social anxiety, social perfectionism, and just to help people increase their capacity to feel more connected. But it all began really with learning the science of friendship and that there was even such a thing.
Yeah. I certainly didn't know there was until you came onto the show. That's the first indicator I had. And by the way, it would have been very helpful for me too, because when I was in my 20s, they didn't have this kind of label for it, but I was one of the most shy people on the face of the planet. And literally, I mean, many people actually retain friendships out of college. I didn't. So like my social circle shrunk from small to none.
Yeah.
Really had was I was involved in I played music. I was in a band, and it was very dysfunctional band, so there was no real great deep friendship going on there. And that was about it. That was my entire social circle. I had nothing going on.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
experience led to other experiences later on in my 30s and 40s that ultimately, when I reached my 50s and I started having my own crisis and came through that crisis, really that whole period of time reinforced for me just how vitally important connections are. And I've only come to a conscious awareness of it within, say, the last 5 or 6 years, something like that. But I was subconsciously aware of it for a long period of time. I had no concepts. I had no, not concepts, but I had no concrete structure to apply to it. I had no way of saying this is what's going on. It was one of those vague, indefinable things. I just knew it was there. One of those
Mhm. I really appreciate you sharing that for and even the way you talk about it, you can tell that you have, right, like, so much, like, ownership over that
things.
story, but I really appreciate you sharing that because there can be shame tied to this, like, "Oh, what's wrong with me? Shouldn't I have this figured out? Am I not likable?" Like, we can add all of this other meaning to it. So, for somebody like you to say this on a podcast and be like, "Oh, I had this experience where I didn't retain any friendships from college," which, by the way, you're so right, that is like a trope, if you will, like of, "Oh, this person, we were roommates in college or we met in college." That is very, very common, but I appreciate you coming and saying that because somebody out there just exhaled a bit
Mm.
hearing that.
Yeah. Well, that usually happens with almost everything that we talk about here on the show. So I appreciate you saying that. But yes, that's a common thing. And I'm glad that we're doing it on this topic. One of the things that I recall vividly when I was in my 20s was not only did I have a lack of connection to others, but I also had, in many ways, a lack of connection to myself as a result.
Yeah.
And I say that because the connection to others is really, I've come to realize, vitally important, not the least of which because others become our mirrors in life. And when you don't have mirrors, you have nothing feeding back to you.
Mm.
Without the feedback, you can feel pretty much isolated from your own life. Like you're kind of floating aimlessly with nothing really going on and nothing is terribly meaningful. And yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah. No, you were so right, and I've never heard it be explained or put in that way, but one thing I was really surprised by, I am getting my master's in social work to be a therapist to work with people through shame
Mm,
and relational trauma and things like that. That is not what I do right now with my work, but, I stay within my scope. However, anyway, I one thing I was surprised and not surprised to learn was that at every psychosocial, and it's literally called psychosocial,
mhm,
every psychosocial phase of our development from the time that we are kiddos, you right, like all going up, all through all ages.
mhm,
We're always looking for how do I connect with myself? Who am I? My autonomy, my individuality, and how do I connect with other people?
yeah.
So if you don't have that, I love the way you described that of those mirrors because it's so true. One thing I like to say a lot to clients because with our culture, the thing that's kind of parroted right now is, well, just don't care what people think or you don't need anybody, right? Like
Mm,
be super independent. And then they get really down on themselves when they want
mhm,
support from somebody or where they do end up caring about what somebody else thinks. And one thing I'm telling them is that your identity is so closely related to your relationships. Nothing has gone wrong. And think about it. How do you identify when you think about yourself? Do you think about yourself as a good sister? As a good
mhm,
father? Do you think about yourself as funny or smart compared to who?
mhm,
Compare
mhm.
funny relative to what? Right? To who?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That comparison is not necessarily a comparison of one's better than the other. Although
Yeah.
it can be that too, which is also kind of the dysfunctional side of it. But it's the kind of comparison that says, if that's the way they are, how do I feel about me in that same way?
Right. Right. And it's necessary for our identity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
This is actually quite healing for me to talk. I've never talked about this.
Well, I
I mean,
appreciate
I've been doing this podcast for 12 years. I've never talked about this.
Well, I'm so glad. So thank you for sharing with me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah. It was a challenging period. And literally, I didn't know how. I knew I needed to do something. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to do something because I could tell. I mean, it's not too hard to figure out when you're on a path like that. If it doesn't change, it's not going to end nice. It's not going to be pretty. So I literally just started to force myself to get out. I found something I did enjoy. I enjoyed dancing. I didn't know that, but I discovered I liked dance. So I started doing social dancing, particularly swing dancing, and that helped. But even there, it was more of, how do I want to describe it? It did provide some degree of depth of connection, but
Mhm.
it wasn't deep connection. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
absolutely. And we need both. So I'm going to guess, not that you didn't make, and again, with the details of you giving me so far,
Sure.
I'm going to guess that you just had like a feel of for community, which is also really necessary. So one thing I actually did for myself, and I've been thinking about this every single week. I've been consistently working with like about 20-ish people every week for the past 4 years. It's the
Mhm.
thing I'm obsessed with. I have Google alerts on my phone. Okay. So I'm constantly thinking about human connection.
Mhm.
And at the beginning of this year, it was like, oh, I really miss having community. Like, I have these deep bonds, but I need community. And so, one thing that I switched from doing was I was doing a lot of yoga and like working out on my own. And I was like, okay, it's really important for me to have that community piece, even though these people are probably not going to be the people I call when things hit the fan. This
Mm.
is just as important for me to have people that I'm like saying hi to and, how's your wife, or how's your husband, how's your kid, how did that wedding go, like
Right.
those kind of conversations are helpful and they do really provide connection. But yes, so deep and meaningful connection, we now know that there is a science to it and how it is created. Do you want me to go into that?
Go for it. Yeah, I'm curious. I
Okay,
always like well, first of all, as listeners know, I love all new perspectives, and I'm really enjoying this one. Um,
beautiful.
but it's because I've learned so much from them. But the other thing is, I love any research and evidence that comes along with the perspectives because I mean, I certainly don't buy into the idea that there is such a thing as scientific proof. I mean, actually, science and proof don't belong in the same
Yeah,
sentence.
yeah,
But I do believe that evidence is useful in so many different ways, particularly in science, because that's
mhm,
how it's the evidence that becomes the framework for understanding what your new way of understanding is going to be. You're going to
yeah,
take your old theory, you're going to take the evidence and say, okay, now I'm going to tweak the theory because the evidence told me something new.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I love that. I think people don't realize that too, that research is also very biased and
It has to
things
be. How
along.
can it
It
be
has to
otherwise?
be. Yes, it has to be. And so I love that perspective. I To be frank too, like I'm such a scientific mind, and that was part of the reason why I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today, because one thing that I have learned over the years and have really humbled myself with is, oh, there's this quote that I love, and it's really helped me like open my mind to new ideas and new things, but it's, the scientists got to the top of the mountain and the mystics were already there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love that so much because I was so scientifically oriented.
Mhm.
But a lot of, especially with like, like ancient cultures, they were doing a lot of these things already that we have evidence for now.
Right.
They have been doing all of those things for years and years and years. So, yes, so the evidence that we have found in the science, if you can picture a triangle, and let's say the base and the bottom of the triangle, let's say those are like where, just to make it super simple, let's say those are your like acquaintance friends. So those are
Okay.
people that you would maybe see at dance, or I would
Sure.
see at yoga. if there's somebody I sit next to in a work meeting, like a coworker of mine, my acquaintance friends.
Mhm.
And then you move up a little bit of a layer. So towards like the middle of the triangle, like a little, if you're imagining kind of like a layered cake, the
Mhm.
middle of the triangle, let's say those are your good friends. And then at the very top of the triangle towards the pinnacle,
Mhm.
that's where your confidants are, our
Mhm.
quote unquote best friends. For a lot of us, our partners,
Right.
maybe a really close sister if we have one. So that, if you can imagine the triangle as far as that goes. Now, what creates meaningful connection, what moves somebody up from an acquaintance friend to a confidant are three things practiced over and over and over again. And right, in different ways, there's other things that go into this, but every friendship ever could be boiled down to these three things.
Okay.
And that is the base of the triangle being meaningful moments. So where we feel seen, understood, where we
Mhm.
share a laugh with somebody. Now, for a lot of people, if they've had a friendship for years and years and years and it's not feeling meaningful anymore, they're not having meaningful moments anymore. But they
Mm.
have the rest of what we're about to talk about. But meaningful moments is the basis of which all friendship is built on. And then the sides of the triangle, if you can kind of imagine them pointing up to the pinnacle. So, like, as we move somebody from an acquaintance to a confidant, we use these two things moving upwards, and that is consistency and vulnerability.
Yeah,
Now,
sure.
whenever I say that, Walt, people have a couple kind of reactions. Some people are like, oh my gosh, another thing I have to be consistent about. And I'm like, no,
That's an
it's
interesting reaction. I hadn't thought of that one.
it's like, no, it's really fun. It's really fun. And it can be really easy. So consistency can kind of be broken down into a couple of flavors. And that is through history and frequency. So for a lot of people, they had a college roommate that they're still really close to,
Mhm.
right? And they might only see that college roommate like a couple times a year,
Right.
and they might still feel really close to that
Mhm.
person.
Mhm.
But that's because they have a lot of history. They had a lot of consistency
Yes.
built up with living with them. Frequency is also why we get really close to our coworkers. We
Sure.
see them every day, we're getting comfortable with them. We have consistent, meaningful moments. This is important. And I like to say this for my clients as well, because we work so much on self confidence in a social setting.
Mhm.
And you could be brimming, like just overflowing with like self confidence, security, and self acceptance. And your brain needs consistent, meaningful moments to know that it is like completely and utterly relaxed and safe with somebody else.
It
And
makes
that's
sense.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other side with vulnerability, I also get mixed reactions here. Some are like, I love that. Yes, give me all the vulnerability. I want to see everybody. And some people are like, oh my gosh, like, I do not want to do that. And
Mhm.
to make it easy for both parties, I like to say that being vulnerable is just seeing a little bit more of somebody else and them seeing a little bit more of you.
Mm, yeah.
So, and we do that incrementally in how we move people up, right? So,
So
oh,
basically, you've outlined a way to be vulnerable that's safe.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's so huge. I was just recently this past weekend, I think this is where I got my little cold. I was on a retreat with some of my colleagues, and that was one of the things that they talked about where they were like, I get way too vulnerable really quick where they end up
Mm.
oversharing.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that can not feel satisfying for the person because then they were like, oh my gosh, I shared way too much with this person that doesn't know me, that doesn't feel safe.
Mhm.
And it cannot feel safe for the other person. So like, oh my gosh, I know this really deep thing about this person. And they don't know anything. Like it can feel unsteady. So incremental vulnerability.
And if I can also throw in, I think what that combination adds up to is it adds up to what today it's a word that I find to be overused, but it's the word of the day. It becomes inauthentic. The relationship becomes inauthentic because we could describe it as having been rushed. We can describe it as too many steps taken at once. But ultimately, what it adds up to is like you were describing. There's not enough frequency.
Yeah.
It's just not there.
Hmm.
And without the frequency, it feels inauthentic. It feels rushed. It feels fake. It feels in some way like it's not the real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. It's like really trying to, because I did this a lot. I tried to like trauma dump my way into a best friendship because I thought
Okay.
knowing everything before I knew this information, I thought if they know everything about me, then we have to be best friends because best friends know everything
Oh,
about each other,
oh.
right? And that's basically what the girls this past weekend were telling me as well. So it comes from a place of let me rush this connection. Let me
Mm.
have this connection. Let me speed up this connection. And there are other ways that we can do that, but that is not one of them. Like you said, it ends up feeling really unauthentic.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it doesn't just feel that way to the other person. It feels that way to you.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what the girls were saying. They were saying, then I go home and then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I told this person all of these things. Why did I do that?" Because it
Oops.
doesn't feel that safe yet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
mhm.
It's also an interesting thing in that it doesn't really do service to yourself. It's like you aren't giving yourself enough credit when you take that kind of approach,
Mm.
right? Because basically what you're saying is you're really not worth getting to know unless you just throw it all out there. In other words, it's not
Wow.
worth taking the time to find out who you are. So therefore, the only chance you're going to get is if you can kind of like slip it all in under the door before the door closes. That's what it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have never heard it be put in those ways. Like, I've never thought about that way, and I've never heard it be put in that way before. And I think you're right. I think it can really feel like that too. Like, "Oh,
Sure.
you don't plan or you're not willing to like spend time to get to know me and do that dance with me." It's no, we have to speed this up really quick.
Right, because if I'm not feeling good about myself, then therefore my perception, about how others are going to feel about me is going to be colored by that. If I'm not
Yeah.
feeling good about myself, then it must be that other people don't feel good about me either. So that's why I have to find some way to force it.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and as somebody who this was my main strategy for a while, it makes a lot of sense because I was really trying to force it to feel better
Mm,
about myself as well. Like, oh,
yeah.
because so much we don't realize this as well, but going back to our original point about the psychosocial stages of development, like I felt really confident. And that's part of the reason why I didn't think that I had social anxiety is because I could be really confident in a lot of areas. Like I felt really good at school. I felt really smart.
Mm,
I, was really proud of myself for all of these other things. And yeah, I really was trying to rush feeling close to people because I really wanted to feel better about myself. I wanted to feel loved.
mm. Yeah.
So,
I'm also curious to know if and how this fits in to the overall theme that you're describing here. One of the ways that I've often described to myself and to others what it has been like for me from the earliest years up through my growing up years, college years, and then early adult years, middle adult years. One theme that played out over and over again is that I was constantly trying to understand why people behave the way they did, because so much of the time their behaviors didn't make sense to me. I
yeah.
think it's actually one of the aspects of myself that led me to be not just a podcaster, but to enjoy podcasting
Mm.
because I'm not. The original podcast, that's where you sat down in front of a mic and you just talked and recorded and then put it out there. But that's not the kind of podcasting I did that once. Never do it again. I hated it. But what I love is this kind of interchange, this exchange with a guest or a guest and a co-host or, some combination like that. Because not only is there an energetic exchange, but there's also an idea exchange. They're both going on at the same time.
Mm.
And that process of that energetic and intellectual and emotional exchange all going on at once, that's what I was missing. That's what led me to not understand why people do the things they do. The lack of that is why I couldn't understand human behavior so much of the time because I had nothing to compare it to that made any sense.
Wow. That is really, really perceptive. And I think
No, that's just 50 years, 60 years of experience all added up together is what that is.
Well, no, it is I think it's very perceptive because again, I don't think I would have used that, but I also think same thing. I was really and one thing my clients do a lot, one thing we work on a lot is they study people's micro expressions in
Mm,
conversations to
mhm,
see, oh, is this person having fun? Do they like me? Am I fun? Am I
mm,
interesting? Right?
mm.
They do a lot of that, and I did so much of that. And I appreciate you holding up the mirror, right? By sharing your experience to myself because I also, right, with not feeling very meaningfully connected to other people, was also really trying to understand and figure out other people. And that is probably a byproduct or maybe even a main facet, I don't know, of now that I do feel meaningfully connected and I've done this work on my own brain and my own processes because overthinking truly for a lot of people it's a habit.
No kidding.
It's a habit.
And
Yeah.
it's a well-versed, well-established habit that gets deeply ingrained.
Right. Right. And but I think that's also a part of it, right? Is I know how these people behave and how they think and how they feel, and I feel meaningfully connected to them. Our worlds are more intertwined, so I'm not trying to understand everybody else's behavior that I interact with too. So I really appreciate that.
I'm glad to
Yeah.
share. It's fun to talk about it with somebody who would have the level of understanding that you have because you bring a tremendous understanding to it. I mean, I could say that to 50 other guests who come out of the program, and I don't think they'd really get it the way you get it. You get it. I can tell. I mean, even as I'm saying the words, I can tell that you get it.
Yeah.
It's very obvious to me, very evident. But I'm
Yeah.
not sure most people would understand that unless you have experienced the kind of experience that we were talking about here. I'm not sure you'd get it.
Yeah.
Because how could you?
Yeah.
You don't have the background for it, really.
Yeah, it is a very unique or it is a very specific, like, experience
It is.
to not feel meaningfully connected, feel
Mhm.
competent and confident. That's a lot of my clients, they're like, "I know I'm, like, a cool person. I know I'm successful, but I really can't get out of my own head. I really don't feel connected." And I think just to, like, take that and add something onto it, unfortunately, I think it's becoming a more common experience. So, unfortunately, I think because we know that the rates of social anxiety are increasing. Avoidant attachment styles, if you're familiar with attachment theory, avoidant attachment styles are increasing. So we're becoming more disconnected. There was this study I read recently about how we're not going to our confidants, so our closest people for support. Like, so I think this, unfortunately, with what we're talking about with overthinking and trying to understand other people's behaviors because we don't feel connected or good with ourselves, I think unfortunately that is gonna become more common and more people will unfortunately understand what we're saying.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm also wondering something though,
Mhm.
because your younger generation. I'm not sure if you're a millennial or Gen Z, but you're
I'm a
somewhere in that
millennial.
range. You're millennial,
Yeah.
okay. But it's also true for Gen Z. I think it's even more true for Gen Z. The role that technology has played in this,
Yeah.
because we live in an era that is really foreign. I'm late baby boomer. It's also true for the Gen Xers. We live in an area where the baby boomer Gen Xer types, don't have the experience that you guys have of having grown up with a technology that essentially has, in many ways, replaced connectivity.
Yeah. Walt, don't even get me started.
I just did.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's too
Yeah.
late.
Yeah, you're so right. It has replaced connectivity in so many ways. You are absolutely 1,000% right. I don't think people realize how much it has impacted their connections because when it's talked about, right, and this is important, it's talked about a lot in terms of comparison.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm comparing myself to these other people I see online being really happy, successful, whatever it may be. But we're also we're more connected in such a shallow, loose way we're overexposed to each other. So it's also creating like what some people are starting to call literally friendship anxiety.
Ooh,
Because
I hadn't heard that term.
yeah, it's becoming a like a new and unfortunately again common thing where we're worried about the number of friends that we have. We're worried about if our friend is on social media and we see them because we can tell, right? Sometimes some social apps have the little green or blue icon that this person's on and they haven't gotten back to our text message, right?
Mm,
We see those things. We also see, even though we might go and like catch up with like Suzanne at dinner, we're seeing, oh, our friend Kelly is like catching up with whoever and whoever. Oh my gosh, maybe I haven't had a dinner like that in a while. Or, oh my gosh, like are Kelly and I still really close? Like,
mm,
we're overexposed to what other people are doing a lot. So it's increasing our anxiety in our friendships. It's also so much easier. So there's this book called Bowling Alone.
mm.
And this book really talks about because my grandparents were they were born in the early 1920s.
Okay.
So I don't know what generation that is. So,
Well, it's pre-boomer, that's for sure.
yeah. So
It's well, if they're born in the 1920s, that's actually the Depression generation. That's Great
yeah,
Depression.
yeah. And I remember my grandparents, and they were introverts. They loved their quiet, like alone time. They were introverts. And it was so common for them that when they came home to go over to their neighbor's backyard and like sit with their neighbor, it was so common for them to go to their church and to go bowling like 3 times a week.
Mhm,
For introverts, okay?
mhm,
So
mhm,
that was super common for them. And then one thing that is talked about is that when the TV was really, really brought into homes, people were then sitting in front of the TV rather than doing that as much. Now, I think truly my grandparents had that habit and then just stuck with it,
mhm.
truly, because I remember them doing that.
Okay.
But for a lot of people, then they were literally sitting in front of the TV. They weren't going to their neighbor's backyard as much anymore.
Mm,
They weren't meeting at what is called a third place between work and home
mhm.
where people would gather. We see this a lot in sitcoms, like the bar people go
Right.
to or the restaurant. They weren't going to those third places as much. They were staying home. Now it's even worse that we have literally these portable TVs, everything in our pockets. I like to joke that, but it's also real. It's easier to watch Friends or to listen to your favorite influencer's podcast
Mhm,
rather than to take that initial, because it's always like, and for everybody listening, it's just like an initial like 5 seconds of discomfort to
mhm.
call up a friend and see if they're available for you to connect with them, right? But it's easier to do those things or to numb out of our emotions, especially if we are, because these things are also overstimulating.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And we're also having more global news on our minds and things like that. It's easier to numb out with these things rather than to take that little bit of discomfort, expend a little bit of energy, and go get refueled in our relationships.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that one of the bigger challenges here is the fact that social media in particular has redefined the meaning of the word friend. It doesn't mean what it used to mean. I mean, there's a blurring of the lines. I mean, the kind of friend you're talking about is, that's the old school kind, but that's not what friend means in most contexts online.
Yeah.
And so I guess part of the question that goes through my mind is, to what degree is that blurring of lines also blurring within the identity of the Gen Xers, or I'm sorry, the Gen Zers and the millennials?
Yeah. It's really funny you say that because I just did a podcast, hasn't come out about it yet, but it's about how our medium friends cause us the most drama and the
Mhm,
most issues. And what that really means is the people that are in the middle that aren't really acquaintances. Like, I wouldn't expect the people I see once a week at my yoga class to send me a happy birthday text. It's nice if they do. I
mhm,
wouldn't expect the people that I meet, those acquaintances, to bring over soup or something along the lines when I'm sick or not feeling very well.
mhm.
I do have those expectations of my confidants, right? I do have those expectations of the people really close to me. But now I love that you said this. We have more medium friends, if you will, people in the middle,
Mhm.
people that aren't super close to us. A lot of people, by the way, aren't lonely because they don't know enough people. They're lonely because they don't have enough confidants. They don't have enough meaningful, deep bonds. And our culture and everything we are just talking about is what is impacting that. But the reason why we have a lot of, if you will, drama around our medium friends is we don't understand what to expect from them. We're really confused about the roles. And some people, the prioritization of each other doesn't always match. Now, that's a whole other topic, but that can be really confusing for a lot of people as well. As, oh, I prioritize you higher than you do me. This is why we see a lot of drama, especially for my female clients when it comes to their bridal party or like their bachelorettes, because somebody might be like, oh, I thought we were close enough for me to be included, and I'm
Mhm.
not being included, or vice versa. But yeah, so the concept of friend has changed and shifted a lot, which is interesting that you say that too, because there was this article that came out from the American Friendship Association.
Hmm. There's an
And
American Friendship Association. Okay, now I'm learning something
yeah,
else new.
yeah, yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, exactly what they do. I've just read a few of their articles, but they talked about, oh, we don't, which they gave a good point. They did a study and they collected a lot of data, if you will. And I think this is
Mhm.
right where our whole conversation earlier really applies,
Mhm.
because they were like, oh, Americans actually have enough friends. But we know that most Americans want their friendships to be more meaningful.
Mhm.
Most Americans want to spend more time with their friends. Most Americans have an increase of relational or friendship anxiety, social anxiety. Like, the loneliness epidemic is not solved just because we define the same number of friends as we did years ago.
Mm.
That was never really the problem. So I'm really glad that you brought that up and said that.
You gave me a couple of notes to make too, because this is a topic I've been giving a lot of thought to. I have a service that I've been trying to launch, and
Mhm.
getting traction's been the hardest part because it's not something that has prior keywords. So I'm kind of inventing my market as I go along. One of the challenges I'm dealing with is how do you break through on this idea of having somebody that you're connecting to, in this case would be a professional connection because you'd be engaging them. It's kind of like a coach, but not really. Um, how do you how do you present that person to the marketplace as somebody you can become close to that somebody can, they can become your confidant. They can be somebody trusted that you're exchanging information with it, on a very relatively intimate level.
Yeah.
uh, and you gave me some really important clues on how I go about doing that, because you're right, it's the meaningful side that makes all the difference. It isn't that there's a lack of people. There's plenty of likes and friends. There's plenty of that,
Mhm.
but the depth of the connection is what's missing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really big.
It is, and it really hurts us too. It really hurts our health, our life satisfaction. It's There's so many things I could say about that too, as well, but it is really important, because and that's actually one, like, myth I like to bunk, if you will, because when
Mhm,
people find out what I do, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I bet you have a million friends." And I'm like,
mhm,
"Actually, I don't, because then I would
mhm.
be close to nobody."
Yeah. The question at that point is, what do you mean by a friend?
You right, right. Well said, well
Yeah.
said, yes. And so, I love your point of, "Oh, how can I, like, discover, decipher, bring people closer?" Like, who are the people I would maybe want to do that with, is what I'm picking up on. Is that
Yes,
fair?
exactly, yeah, yeah.
And
And
one
who would I feel safe doing that with? Who do I feel like would have my back?
Yeah. So for everybody listening, this is what I did, and if I could do it in a global pandemic as somebody who was getting over having insecurities in social settings and social anxiety, you can do this, okay? So,
Mhm,
and it's fun. I wanna keep bringing back to that. We've made friendship such a chore in our culture, like another thing on our to-do list. It's fun and it's fulfilling, and your body will literally respond to stress differently. You'll have so much more energy. It's fun. Okay, so let's just all understand that.
I love
But
that. Yeah.
but one thing that I did was I made a huge list, and this is also just like a really fun and fulfilling activity to do in general. I made a huge list of who are all the people that I really had that spark of connection with. Who were
Mhm.
the people that I connected with that I really admired, that I felt the best around, and really dumped out and like wrote this huge list of people asking myself those questions. And then, and for me personally, I know this isn't true for everybody. Some people can develop really deep relationships with friendships, or like new friends online. That is
Mhm.
a thing that happens for a lot of people nowadays. I do have some clients that are like streamers or just very online. They develop friendships that way. That is something that can happen. But for me, I wanted somebody that I could go to my farmer's market with, I could go on a hike with, right?
Yes.
So I looked at this huge list of, okay, here are all these people I had that spark with. Here are all these people that I felt the best around. Here are all these people that I admire.
Mhm.
And for me personally, because some people want a specific thing from their friendships,
Mhm.
and that's like a whole, I'll pin that for a sec. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
But I knew I wanted to be friends with people that really wanted to give back. The friendships I had before were not people that really wanted to give back or impact their communities. That wasn't something that was they weren't very passionate about. I
Mhm.
wanted that
Mm.
for me. So that was something I also paid attention to as I was writing this list. And then I write out this list. And also it's so fun. And I wrote, because sometimes people think, oh, well, I don't know enough people because they're thinking of just now. I wrote out that list of all of those women that I connected with in college, the clubs I was a part of, the jobs that I had. I wrote out everything. Then I looked at who lives relatively close to me,
Mm.
starred those people. And I did this. I think you shouldn't go. This is just my opinion. I don't think you should go over 5. But I looked at that list and I was like, okay. And it doesn't mean, well, so I looked at this list and I prioritized 4 of those women, new friends.
Okay.
Some of them I hadn't talked to in years.
Mhm.
Okay. But I knew lived close to me. I knew really cared about impacting their communities, were very emotionally intelligent people
Mhm.
that I admired in a bunch of different ways. And so I prioritized those 4 women, and I intentionally applied that triangle in a bunch of different ways to those 4 people.
Okay.
2 of those women are now my confidants, my closest friends. I will be seeing them later this evening.
Nice.
We have weekly hangouts and things like that. They are the people I plan vacations with and things like that now. And I
Wow.
did, right? So those are 2 of those women. One of those women moved up my triangle and became a closer friend. And then one of those other women rejected me.
Mm.
So the reason why I picked 4 people is because I didn't want to be like, it has to work with this one person, and to
Mm.
make them
Yeah.
feel that graspy energy that I had of, it has to work
Right.
out. We have to become best
Which
friends.
is guaranteed that it's going to kill it right there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so I couldn't be happier with that.
That's beautiful. I like that. Yeah. It, that's actually one of the beautiful things about the modern technology, because despite all of the dysfunction, that's the word I would associate with it, the
Yeah.
dysfunction in the way that the connection happens, there is at least even superficial connection. There is some. It gives you a framework to work with, and it gives you a population to work with. I
Mhm.
know that in my own case, one of the biggest challenges I had when I was in my 20s, it was pre-internet, long before internet, and as a result, because I had not maintained connection with college or high school friends, and I had moved out of area, I literally had a social network of 0. When you have no social network at all, trying to do the task that you described is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying, because you know you're gonna get sucked into, well, this one's gotta work because you only have one.
Yeah.
You have such a
Yeah.
small numbers. So that's the beautiful part about having the multiple connections that we get through the online world.
I
And
would
and
agree.
I love your point about how you want to have the offline, but there's also value in the online, because like when I started this podcast, I started it in 2012. And the reason I started it was 2008 with the financial crisis. That crisis wiped out my business and it wiped out my ex-wife's business. So we were
Mm,
devoid of income and basically starting from scratch, and all the savings was going out the window and going deep into debt and all that kind of stuff. And made a little bit of progress, but by 2012 we were in really bad shape.
mm.
So I was looking for answers. I'd heard about law of attraction. So I figured, okay, I'll start a podcast about law of attraction because I can afford to do that. I can't afford anything else, but I can do that. And that led me to, meeting people who would help me figure this stuff out. The unexpected benefit that came out of that was I found I loved it. I didn't expect that part. And so, I mean, I've done over 2,000 episodes. I mean, I promise you the first 300 or 400 were about law of attraction. And then we're pretty much done, but I wanted to keep going. So I just kind of expanded the topic to life and said, okay, we're going to keep going here simply because I enjoyed it so much. And I made all kinds of really good friends as a result. People who, when my ex-wife left me, they were the people I went to for support. They were my defense team, so to speak.
I love
So
that.
there's a lot to be said for those kinds of online connections, people who we can do this kind of conversation with. Uh,
Right.
but by the same token, you do need to have those offline connections, and that's the other beauty of even the superficial connections that you can get online. It becomes possible through those to establish the offline connections, and that's what you were describing so eloquently. So I love
Yeah.
that piece a lot.
And what really matters too for a lot of it is the consistency of it. So the
Mm.
retreat I just went on, we meet twice a year and it's just a bunch of women that we have similar business models, business types,
Hmm.
and we meet at this place and we do things like go on hikes and swim and whatever it may be, but we talk a lot about each other's businesses and connect each other to other people and talk about, hey, like, because as you know, having like your own business, right, your own platform, you can get kind of, oh, but my messaging is also this and this, and to have somebody be like, no, this is the most important, this is the heart of it, right, to have be that
That's
mirror for
feedback.
you,
Yeah, you got to have
that
that.
feedback. And so meeting with them twice a year, those are really some of my, if you will, like closer friends, like somebody I would really call a friend,
Right.
truly.
Right.
And I see them twice a year. That's
Mm.
it.
Mm.
Sometimes I connect with one of them on Zoom. There's one, well, actually a couple girls that I meet with regularly over Zoom throughout the year, but that consistency of seeing them that twice a year, that's enough. That's enough.
Well, interesting you should bring this up because I want to ask you about something here.
Mhm.
Because one of the um, theories that I've been building with this new service I've put together, it's basically a service where I call it a positivity partner service. Essentially,
I
you
love
connect with
that.
somebody who becomes your cheerleader, your kind of a coach, but also just somebody who's in your corner and just helping you get to a good space. And uh, one of the ideas that goes along with that in my framing of it is that in order to establish new patterns of positivity, especially if you have a history of negativity going on, you need to establish it daily. And so I've been structuring it in a way that someone can have meetings with their positivity partner on a daily basis and be able to afford to do that.
Mm.
And the reason I want to do that is I really think it's essential, especially with what we now know about what it takes to reprogram the mind, what it takes to reprogram the nervous system, that you need to have 90 to 120 days in order to really firmly establish a new habit. Well, if
Mhm.
that new habit is going to be a habit of positivity, you need to have that support every single day.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a really good thing. I love that you have these friends, but you're only connecting, a couple times a year. And I'm thinking, what do you do in your case, Jewel, when you need to have a new way of establishing you're trying to establish a new habit of some kind? I'm going
Yeah.
to just throw out there a positivity habit, but it could be anything.
Yeah.
You're trying to make some significant change.
Yeah. Beautiful question. And also, there's a bunch of reasons why that program that you're describing really works is because we also know too that the brain literally atrophies in isolation. And this is part of the
Mm,
reason why I recognized, oh, I don't have community. Like, yes, I have my closest friends that I see every week, but I need to have community of just seeing other people
that's right. Yeah,
throughout the
it's
week. And
essential.
it's essential. So what you're describing too, we also are much more likely to follow through on things. And it doesn't mean anything because before people are like, oh my gosh, it means so much about my willpower, whatever it may be. We are so much more likely to follow through on something just with the presence of another human
Right.
in the room, or knowing that there will be another presence in the like another human there. So there's so many reasons why that is so brilliant. But for a new habit or for making a change, I think we can develop a couple of things. One, we can start to talk to our people. It sounds so simple, but it's so helpful. Start to talk about our goals, our wants, the changes we want to make with our people, and not from a place of just being like, I'm just gonna pick working out because that's a common one for people, right? So not just like, oh, I should be getting to the gym, I need to work out, but talking to them and saying things like, can I really talk to you about like working out and how I can make it easier on myself to do? Or can I talk to you about like what might be fun with this?
Mhm.
And the thing too, this is also, it provides so much closeness, is you can also say, what are you working on?
Mhm.
What are you making change in? How can I support you with that? I did a round table, if you will, with a lot of my guy friends, the group that I was friends with before, long term from college.
Mhm.
I had a round table with them, and and they're so fantastic. But I encouraged them. We were kind of talking because we were a little bit concerned about one of our friends, and like just one little behavior. Not that it was super concerning, but we were like, hey, I'm just checking in because we love you.
Mhm.
And then I was like, okay, now let's all go around and let's do this. What are you working? And I learned some things about some of my close friends, and I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this person was really going on this like fitness journey. I had no idea. They didn't talk about it. Now
Mhm.
I know. And now I get to, right? And I'm thinking about that. I get to message and be like, hey, I'm so proud of you for doing this. Or I get to ask them, how did that thing go? So
Mhm.
I think it's such a beautiful thing to do, whether it's one on one or in a group, to
Mhm.
just go around and talk about like, what are you working on? What would you like support
Yeah.
with? And when I say support, it doesn't mean that, unless that's something that you're willing to do, it doesn't mean you wake up early with them and go work out with them in order to support them, for if unless that's something you wanna do.
Yeah.
But literally, again, just the presence, having the knowledge that somebody else is also caring for you, rooting for you, investing in you doing this is helpful. So just saying, "How can I support you?" "Oh, I can encourage you, I can ask you about
Mhm.
this."
Mhm.
That matters, right? Like, so one, doing that, it's also very intimate, it's very vulnerable, right? So it
Sure.
brings people in closer. The other thing we can do is we can decide, if you will, like our life council. That's what I like to call it.
Mhm.
So for me, right, like I really, really enjoy yoga. I also have really bad scoliosis. And
Oh,
so,
no.
yeah, so yoga really helps with
Yeah,
that,
I'm
right?
sure, yeah.
Yeah. And so I there's that. I'm an entrepreneur, right? I'm a business owner, so I want to talk to people about, right, like ethics and online business. I want to talk to people about marketing and things like that. I so all like just for an example, for some people it might also be that they really enjoy biking.
Mm.
Or I had one client say this recently. I thought it was so fun. They were like, "I just want a friend to like chit chat with.
Nice.
I just want to chit chat about nothing. Just a chit chat friend that I interact with often."
Yeah.
That friend, by the way, is, her apartment complex, like, pool manager. She goes out there in her lunch every day, she sits and talks with him while he while he cleans, and so she's like, "And I love it," and sometimes we go on
Mhm.
walks other times and whatever it may be. So, developing your life council of, like, what is it that you really wanna experience,
Mm.
and inviting other people into that, or going to spaces like you did with the dance class,
Mhm.
right? Like, I enjoy dance, I'm gonna go here, I'm going to connect with these people. Again, develop our life council. We're also more likely to stick with things. We're more likely to keep investing in those things. Again, if we know that there's a presence of other people, like I am so much more likely to go to yoga. There's these two guys named Brian. They're both named Brian at the yoga studio. I know if I don't go, that the Bryans are going to be like, "Where were you?"
Yeah, yeah, right. A little accountability there. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, good stuff. I love that. Before we got going here, you were telling me about something called the Making of Connections bundle, and we haven't really talked about that, and we're kind of running out of time. So I want to make sure we get that in there. What is that? Tell me
Yeah.
what that is, and tell our listeners what that is.
Thank you so much. We use this. So it was at the largest women's conference in Michigan, in my state, where we taught this material, where we gave it to the attendees ahead of time. So that way they felt belonging and comfort and were able to connect with people at the event, and also used these trainings to turn the people that they met into friends.
Mhm.
So that's what the bundle's about. It's 2 trainings and worksheets that are called How to Belong at Any Event and How to Turn People You Meet into Friends. Because most people know how to meet people.
Mhm.
They don't know how to turn it into friends. And so
Mm.
that really goes over what we described today in a way that helps the people watching, helps them look at and be like, okay, how does this work for me? Right? Like, what do I want to do for me? And it helps prime them and ask them those questions, and also has like more information on how to do that with ease and for it to be
Mm.
fun.
Yeah.
So those are those 2 trainings. If you go to connectionwithjewel.com, Jewel, Jewel, like a gem. If you go to connectionwithjewel.com, my lovely assistant put those up there for everybody. So if you subscribe to our email list, we will send you those trainings. And yeah,
Okay.
we're really excited about them. We're very proud.
We'll put that into the show notes to make it easy for people to find the link too. But
Beautiful.
that's good stuff. Thanks for sharing that with people.
Thank
It's great to have
you.
it available. A couple of things that I want to do before we run out of time here. First of all, do you welcome direct contact? Do you want people to reach out to you?
I do. Yeah, I actually had somebody recently, for the first time ever. It was so fun and so exciting. I had somebody message me and say, "Hey, can you talk about this topic on your podcast?" I just launched the podcast this year, but
Congratulations. That's
thank,
great.
thank you so much. But we just released the episode last week on it of her
Wow.
question. Yes, it was so good. It was about the art of conversation. So
Okay.
I do welcome that. Yes, I appreciate you asking.
What's the best way for somebody to reach you?
So we have my email, which is jewel@connectionwithjewel.com.
Okay.
And I right now mostly hang out on Instagram. I'm trying to transition more to TikTok because I prefer just video content. But those are both at Connection with Jewel.
Okay. Good. So we have that out there, and that combined with the web address, one way or another, I think people can find you. Which is
Yes.
So that's the first thing. Second thing I want to do, this is something I've been doing for a couple of years now, because I noticed a few years ago that this was true. And when I noticed it, it kind of surprised me. Like, why don't we recognize this more often? You'll understand what I mean in a moment. But you're an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. A lot of people are in that entrepreneurial spirit these days. But even if you're not, you're engaging in some way. You're listening to a podcast, like people are listening to this podcast. You're engaging and taking in all this content that's being created, a lot of free content being created, which is great. I love it. That's where I noticed that there's something really strange that goes on, which is there are so many people who are givers, who are putting out all this great content, and they don't get recognized for that. And I said, what? Wait a minute. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, shouldn't we be recognizing people for what they're doing? And it's not like it's just kind of going out there and just kind of disappearing in the void. There are people who are consuming it and they're getting value out of it. And the original creator never knows. I mean, you kind of hope that they are out there. You kind of hope it's happening, but you never find out about it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you get feedback. Sometimes you get an email or you get a text message or something. But most of the time, when somebody is gaining benefit from it, you don't know.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm a podcast host. I could probably do something about that. So here's me doing something about that. Jewel, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been putting content out to, and who've been benefiting from all that content, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in this world.
Thank you, Walt. That is so touching. Thank you. That is, wow, you hit right to
You see what I
my
mean?
heart.
This is something we just overlook this. We
Yeah.
just overlook this entirely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And wow, if anybody wants to know what it's like to make somebody feel seen, Walt just gave a perfect example. So it's a huge part of connection. But no, seriously, thank you. That is so beautiful. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. One of the reasons I really enjoy doing that is because I love seeing reactions like that.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Could you tell? I was like, "Oh my
Oh
god."
yeah, and
Yeah.
I can feel it. I mean, you know how you feel it when you receive that. I can feel you receiving it, and so it's like I get to relive it every single time, over and over and over again.
Beautiful. I
Yeah.
have no other word for it. That is so beautiful. I'm so glad that you do that.
Well, I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad that you've basically been the inventor of the science of friendship, and thank you
Yes,
for
I
doing
do.
that.
I do think I didn't mention this earlier, and I want to make sure I do. There's so much added to this, and I'm so grateful for all of the people out there that have contributed to this body of knowledge that I have been able to access. I didn't mention this earlier, and I'm so glad you said that because I want to make sure I did. I was like, oh, gotta make sure. The person that created the triangle and everything and put that together was not me. Her name is Shasta Nelson, but
Okay.
she was like the first person who really started putting this together. Now,
Uh-huh.
there's more and more people out there. Again, there's a whole association dedicated to friendship nowadays because it's such a problem because so
Mm.
many people want this. So, thank you. I really care about being knowledgeable and I'm obsessed. I love talking about it. So thank you for also seeing me and I do not discredit what you said. I also have learned so much and combined so much together, but that is the foundation that I always go back to and I just always want to, give credit where credit is due. So,
Absolutely, of course. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's why also you deserve the credit too, because you do deserve credit. So
Thank you.
thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this. This has been a fun conversation. I really enjoyed it a lot.
It was so fun.
Yeah.
So incredibly
Well,
fun. Thank
we'll
you
have to have you
so
back again
much.
sometime. I want you to meet some of my co-hosts, so we'll have you back again sometime.
I would love that. I would love nothing more.
Sounds good. All right. So thank you much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.